Hi, I'm Sarah from Megaphone Marketing. We're a digital marketing agency based out of Australia where we offer performance marketing to a range of different clients. My role at Megaphone is head of operations. So basically, that means really working on the processes and making our internal processes work as efficiently as possible.
Okay, well, thank you, Sarah, for joining this little conversation here. Tell us a bit about the personal journey that led you to becoming the head of operations at Megaphone. What led you there?
Yeah, so I actually started at Megaphone over 4 years ago. I started as an account manager. So my role was client facing, creating ads, communicating with clients. And naturally, over the years, I was able to sort of progress at Megaphone where I would sort of get bigger clients and then found myself in a position where I was leading a team as well. Which is fantastic. And then over the COVID years, Megaphone saw exponential growth. We grew very quickly and all of a sudden, things that worked very well as a small agency, which is what we were when I started to really show their cracks as we grew. And I love things to be organized. The way my brain works, I sort of take a step back and think about how things work and how we can make them better and to suit everyone, both parties involved. So it was basically just a natural progression where there was no head of operations or anyone in operations at Megaphone when I started, and there was that need for it all of a sudden. So, yeah, basically stepped into that role. And now we have two people in the team, which is really exciting that we're spread across all departments of the company to just help everyone be able to do their roles in the best way possible so that they can get the most out of their roles. And also, our clients as well are seeing the best possible service.
Now you're Australia's number one digital agency. Can you talk a little bit about what has allowed you to grow so significantly and what makes you different as an agency?
Yeah. When we think about it, it boils down to really our relationships with clients. I guess the fundamental thing behind our relationships with clients is authenticity. When we work with clients, they're just not another number in our agency. The people involved in that client are genuinely part of that team. The way that we look at it is that we are an extension of the team. We want this company, to succeed in their industry, in their area of expertise. So we will do absolutely anything to make sure that they get there. So initially, if we're starting with a strategy potentially on Meta, that's what we initially thought made the most sense. But we see, as data comes back, that there are other areas of opportunity that might actually work, or there are changes in the business that make sense to focus on. We are the first ones to sort of jump in and say, hey, look, ultimately your goal is to make X amount, or, at the end of the day, every business wants to grow. So to see that growth, we suggest doing X, Y, and Z. And I guess it's just a continual relationship where it's, always achieving for that next goal essentially, and helping businesses see the same success that we've been able to see as a business as well. Particularly as I mentioned that in COVID is when we saw that massive increase. And it was because it was a very tough time for people. And if things weren't working, then, we were the first ones to come to them and say, all right, this isn't working. So we're going to do this, and really just sort of work with them to get them to the position that, they deserve to be in.
Yeah, especially with COVID, I'm sure that many businesses had to change significantly. So if you were able to adapt to that, then that's certainly something that I, as a business owner, would really appreciate. Maybe tell us a bit about who is your ideal client. Let's say someone is listening to this and they're like, well, actually, we're kind of looking for a new agency. What would be important things that the company would have to kind of, tick to be a good client for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that we work with a range of clients from small to enterprise size. Ideal clients, I mean, we work with both e-commerce and service. We have specialized teams within Megaphone that are e-commerce strategy focused and service strategy focused, because both of those types of businesses require different strategies and different processes. So we've got both of those sorted within our teams. In terms of, I guess, specific industries, honestly, the sky's the limit, really. The focus really for us is, what the client is selling, looking at um, the average order value and how much they're willing to spend, and sort of work backwards from there. If your goals are to achieve $100,000 in your first month, then that conversation with us is about, all right, cool, then how much are you willing to spend? Looking at the data essentially, to see what it would take for you to get there. And we may be honest and say, look, that's not probably possible in your first month, but hey, it's possible in your sixth month if we do implement this strategy and you've got the time and investment to be able to see that over the 6 months. So really, it's people who are wanting to see their business grow. They're not, looking for it to happen overnight, because the reality is these things, very, very rarely skyrocket overnight. So somebody who's willing to I guess work with a team to see that growth sustainably over a period of time, and then work with the wins and see what we can learn from all of the data and go from there. Obviously, there are, some clients that do see that rapid growth in a short period of time, which is fantastic. And ultimately, that's the goal. But at the end of the day, quick wins are great, but businesses do want to see that long-term success. They still want to be here in, 6 months, 12, 18, 5 years time, potentially. So, we really want to make sure that whatever wins we are seeing, it is for that long-term gain for that client.
Great, perfect. And you've already touched on a bit about your kind of process. So let's say I'm someone who's interested in your services. Is there some kind of audit that you do typically first? How does this process look like, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. So once, someone gets in touch with us, we have an initial conversation with them to see sort of what they're interested in. Is it a particular service? What their goals are as a business. And then once we identify if we're a good match for one another, we then sort of move to that next stage where we put together a tailored strategy for them. To be able to do that tailored strategy, we definitely need to be able to do an audit of their accounts. So typically we would look at the accounts that they've currently had running, because that data is really useful for us to be able to build the best strategy for the next steps. If they haven't run any ads in the past, that's totally fine. But things like Google Analytics and their website backend data is something that we can look at to help us, put together that strategy for them. So we'll start with that audit, which is where we'll have our experts dive in and have a look at all of the learnings that we can take from the account, put together that strategy. And then once we're ready to kick off with that strategy, it's really sort of going from there and implementing everything.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. And obviously, in order to dive into the data, there is a step that I'm sure is always fun, which is getting access, which is one of the reasons why we're talking today. How are you getting access at that early stage before the client is even a client? How does that process currently work?
Yeah, absolutely. Access is one of those topics that always comes with an asterisk, because it's not as easy as people think it is, and it's always changing. So that all means that it can become, more difficult. Things pop up, things change all the time. So at the moment, for that access, we are using Leadsy. So using the view performance link that we've got embedded on our website, where we will send that to the prospect during the process via email, and they'll give us the access to the necessary platforms for us to be able to conduct that audit. Previous to that, it was a little bit more difficult and manual, where we had to walk them through. So Leadsy has made it a lot easier to be able to get that initial access. And I guess it also just helped with that relationship as well, sort of reducing the barriers to entry or the challenges for that prospect.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask about like that relationship part. So obviously there's a reason why you've made a change there to make this process maybe a little bit slicker. Do you have any data or even maybe anecdotal data on what the impact of that is or was of making the change to make this auditing process smoother?
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, there's a couple of ways to look at it, because there are lots of variables involved. Firstly, yeah, as I mentioned, the relationship side, it's definitely helped with a large percentage of prospects and clients to be able to maintain the strong rapport that been able to build with them throughout the sales process, that Leadsy essentially just walks them through step by step. And less sort of frustrated calls of them saying, I don't know what this is, I don't know what that is, particularly with the Leadsy feature where there are errors, it identifies and tells you what the problem is. Previous to that, there were a lot of phone call, and it would what screen are you seeing? What can you see on your end? And it's frustrating for, both ends, because as platforms update themselves, what I might see on my end is different to what you might see on your end. So it can create a interesting conversation on the phone. So it's definitely helped from that perspective. And then, yeah, I guess sort of the next step in terms of when a client is ready to start with Megaphone. Obviously, previously we'd had view access, so we want to make sure we've got edit access to all of their platforms. Again, we just send through the Leadsy link again, where it sort of updates their access. And I guess from our perspective, one of the key focuses for us, which is particularly over this next quarter, is improving that, sign date to onboarding date. So when someone initially signs to when they're onboarded, sometimes we found that getting access to their accounts really drew that time period out, which meant that, multiple back and forths. Maybe we were able to start Google ads because we had access, but we had trouble with Facebook. So Facebook ads didn't start straight away. So that has become a strong focus for us. And through Leadsy, we've actually seen over the past 2 months a 25% increase in efficiency. So the amount of time it takes from sign to onboarded has decreased, which is fantastic. Obviously, still room for improvement. And that's something that we're going to continue focusing on, particularly, like we've said, that sometimes particular platforms make it a little bit more difficult than we need it to be. So having, Leadsy as efficient as possible, and then you sort of, I guess, backstops that if this doesn't work, then we'll move to plan B, plan C, and yeah, essentially make that sign to onboarding as efficient as possible.
Fantastic. Also, super happy to hear that you've seen significant improvements in that process because of Leadsy. That's great to hear. And so, in earlier conversation, you told me that you're putting a lot of effort to try to make these first couple of weeks, I don't exactly remember the exact time that you said to me, make that ads as smooth and as, yeah, I guess, successful as possible. Why is that initial phase so important?
Yeah, definitely. So it's 6 months. The first 6 months, we're focusing on making, the best experience for clients. We personally have only a 3-month agreement, initial agreement, and then it's month from there. So, that puts a lot of pressure on our end to obviously make sure that in that first 3 months, clients are seeing exactly the results that they need to. Typically, agencies might have 6 to 12 month contracts where you're sort of locked in for that time period. Whereas, I guess from our perspective, we want to show to clients that we'll work as hard as we can and to get you where you need to be at those 3 months and sort of beyond. In terms of sort of making the 6 months or beyond that relationship as strong as possible, and what we've found is that, once someone is with you for that 6 to 1 year or 6 months to 12-month mark, they are at a much higher percentage of staying with you, long term. And it is managing expectations, making sure that both teams align. Someone might say they want this, so you do that, but really they actually meant this. So making sure that the relationship at every step of the way, while we look at the data and that the data indicates where the strategy must go, when you're working with a business, particularly sort of business owners of their brand, it's their child. The business is everything to them. So sometimes, obviously the data correlates to the numbers and they just want to see the increase in revenue in their back end. But a lot of the time, it's a lot more than that. They have ideas that they want to launch new collections. They want to be seen as this type of brand. So it's really just listening to them that whole time and making sure that everything in the strategy reflects where they want their business to go. And if that doesn't make sense, then we have that conversation with them. There are scenarios where a client might come and go, I want to be the next Nike. And it's like, great. That takes a lot of hard work. So why don't we, try and be the next this brand, and then we can work towards being the next Nike. So it is really just making sure that that relationship throughout that first 6 months is, we're always listening, reading between the lines, making sure that they actually understand the data, because it's more than just saying, cool, here's your return on ad spend, here's how much we spent, things are looking great. And it's happened in the past where I'm sure many agencies have had the same experience where you're working with a client and results are great and they go, well, we've decided to leave. And it's like, what? Why? And it's because they're with you for more than that, more than what the results are. So yeah, that's why we're focusing, I guess, on really making the first 6 months the best possible experience for our clients, and yeah, doing what we can to prove that Megaphone is the right choice for them.
Nice. I want to read it back in a little bit back to the onboarding as part of these 6 months, which is probably it's a small part, but it's obviously also crucial. Can you just talk a little bit about how Leadsy has kind of made this onboarding experience more smooth for your clients, and what do you think the impact of that is? I mean, maybe there's data, but maybe there's also just something that you just heard from your clients.
Yeah, so previous to Leadsy, we had a giant PDF that ran through all of the steps that a client needed to fill out. And what we would find is that, steps would be missed or they wouldn't be done properly. And I mean, it makes sense. These people are coming to us because they need help with their marketing because they don't have time to do it themselves. So why would they have time to read a 10, 15-page document that says, do this, now do this, now do this? And I guess what Leadsy has brought to that process is essentially a little bit of hand-holding. We're still essentially doing all of those steps that were in the PDF originally, but it is guiding someone and their focus through all of the steps, and makes it a lot easier. And still, sometimes, they miss a couple of things, or they may not have the right permissions to an account to be able to give access, which is, I think there's always going to be an element that is out of our control that can't be solved by software or automation or whatnot. But being able to get all of the access that we need, or at least, 80 to 90% of what we need in that initial first go, is a success. Obviously, like I said, we want to make sure, continue to improve that. But, before you'd get access to a page and that's it. They think they've done it all. So it's definitely helped us, take a couple of steps ahead of where we were previously. Now that PDF is only, I think, 5 or 6 pages long, if I can remember correctly, and a bunch of that is just headings and things like that. So it's, yeah, definitely helped us improve from that perspective. And like we said earlier as well, just from that rapport perspective, being able to continue things from that sales process to actually starting ads in the most happy way possible, so that there's at least frustration on trying to get access.
Absolutely. Perfect. Any last words, anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or anything you wanted to say?
I don't think so. I think that's it for now. I'll let you know. I'll send you any other quotes if anything else comes to mind.
Perfect. Thank you so much.